There is a question that quietly lives inside almost every human being. A question that appears when life becomes unfair, when you work hard, yet something always seems to go wrong, when you are born into circumstances you never chose, when someone seems to suffer terribly despite having done nothing to deserve it. And sometimes when you look at your own life and wonder why certain doors keep closing, certain people keep appearing, and certain lessons seem to return again and again, the question becomes impossible to ignore. Is this karma? And if it is, can you escape it? Perhaps you have heard that karma is a cosmic punishment system. You do something wrong, the universe remembers it, and someday you suffer the consequences. Do something good, and you receive a reward. Simple, almost like a spiritual bank account. But that is not the deepest understanding of karma found within the Vedic tradition. The ancient Indian sages described something far more subtle. They spoke about action, consequence, intention, attachment, desire, memory, identity, rebirth, and liberation. And they asked a question far more profound than, "What punishment do I deserve?" They asked, "What is it that keeps a soul bound to the cycle of experience in the first place?" Because according to the Vedic worldview, karma is not merely something that happens to you. Karma is also something you participate in creating. Every action leaves an impression. Every intention strengthens a tendency. Every desire pulls consciousness toward another experience. And every experience, when misunderstood, can become the seed of another action. This creates a cycle. Action creates consequence. Consequence creates reaction. Reaction creates desire. Desire creates further action. And the wheel continues. But here is where the story becomes extraordinary. The Vedic sages did not simply teach, "You have karma, therefore suffer." They taught something much more liberating. Karma can be understood. Karma can be transformed. And at the deepest level, the one who realizes the true nature of the self is no longer bound by karma in the way an ignorant person is. That means the real Vedic answer to the question, "Can you escape your past karma?" is not simply yes. And it is not simply no. The answer is, you cannot always erase what has already been set into motion, but you can change your relationship to it, stop creating new bondage, and ultimately awaken to that which was never bound by karma at all. And this distinction changes everything, because perhaps the goal was never to destroy your past. Perhaps the goal was to stop becoming a prisoner of it. Imagine a person carrying a heavy backpack. Inside the backpack are stones. Each stone represents something from the past, an action, a decision, a habit, a desire, a reaction, an attachment. Perhaps even something inherited through circumstances and tendencies that seem to have followed the person from birth. Now, imagine this person walking through life. Every time something painful happens, they reach into the backpack and say, "This is because of my karma." They blame the backpack. But the sages would ask a different question. Why are you still carrying it? And more importantly, who is the you carrying it? This is where Vedic philosophy becomes much deeper than ordinary ideas about cause and effect. Karma is not simply a list of punishments waiting for you. The Sanskrit word karma fundamentally relates to action. Action can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be mental. But action is not isolated. Action is connected with intention, and intention is connected with desire. Desire is connected with identification, and identification is connected with the sense, "I am this individual person. I want this. I fear that. I must have this. I cannot lose that. The more consciousness identifies with these movements, the more deeply it becomes entangled in the consequences of action. This is why the Bhagavad Gita does not simply tell Arjuna to stop acting. That would be impossible. Human beings act constantly. Even refusing to act is itself a form of action. Instead, Krishna teaches Arjuna how to act without becoming bound by the fruits of action. This is one of the most revolutionary ideas in the entire tradition. The problem is not action alone. The problem is attachment to action and its results. You work, you love, you build, you struggle, you make decisions, you care for others, you pursue your responsibilities. But if your entire identity becomes dependent upon the result, every action creates another chain around consciousness. I acted, therefore I must receive. I gave, therefore I must be appreciated. I loved, therefore I must be loved in return. I succeeded, therefore I am worthy. I failed, therefore I am worthless. And now action has become bondage. The Vedic tradition contains a profound idea. Actions do not merely change the world outside you, they change the person performing them. Think about anger. The first time you become angry, perhaps it feels unusual. The second time, it becomes easier. The 10th time, anger arrives more quickly. Eventually, you may find yourself becoming angry before you consciously decide to become angry. Something has been reinforced. A tendency has formed. The ancient Indian philosophical traditions developed several concepts to explain these impressions. You may encounter words such as samskara and vasana. A samskara can be understood, broadly, as an impression left in the mind by experience and action. A vasana can refer to a latent tendency or inclination. These impressions influence future behavior. So karma is not only about an invisible cosmic accountant recording your deeds, it is also about what your actions do to consciousness. If you repeatedly choose greed, greed becomes easier. If you repeatedly choose resentment, resentment becomes familiar. If you repeatedly choose compassion, compassion becomes natural. If you repeatedly practice discipline, discipline becomes stronger. Your actions are shaping the instrument through which you experience reality. This is why karma is intimately connected to habit, and this is why the past can appear to control the present. Because your past actions are not necessarily sitting somewhere outside you waiting to attack you. They may already be inside the structure of your conditioning. You become what you repeatedly practice, and the cycle continues until awareness interrupts it. Later, Hindu philosophical traditions often speak about karma in three broad categories. These categories help explain an apparent contradiction. If karma can be transformed, why do some consequences seem unavoidable? The first is sanchita karma. This can be understood as accumulated karma, the vast store of karmic impressions and consequences associated with the individual across existence. Imagine an enormous reservoir. You cannot see every drop. You only experience a tiny portion at any particular moment. That leads to the second category, prarabdha karma. This refers to that portion of karma considered to have begun bearing fruit in the present life. It is often used to explain why a person is born into particular circumstances, why one person has one body and another has another, why lives begin under radically different conditions, why certain experiences appear to unfold despite sincere spiritual effort. Then there is agami karma, sometimes called future or forthcoming karma. This is the karma generated through present actions that contributes to future consequences. And here lies a critical insight. If your present actions are continually creating future karmic consequences, then simply waiting for old karma to disappear is not enough. You could spend your entire life trying to burn yesterday's karma while creating tomorrow's bondage. The real solution must therefore involve changing the way action itself is performed. And this is precisely where the Bhagavad Gita gives one of its most important teachings. Imagine two people doing exactly the same job. Both wake up at 6 in the morning, both work for 10 hours, both receive the same salary. From the outside, their actions appear identical, but internally, they are completely different. The first person thinks, "I must succeed. If I fail, I am nothing." Every task becomes a test of identity. Every criticism becomes an attack. Every success becomes something they must defend. Every failure creates fear. The second person thinks, "This is my responsibility. I will perform it with full attention. I will do my best." But the result is not entirely under my control. The actions look similar, but the inner relationship to action is completely different. The first person is bound by the result. The second person is practicing something close to what the Gita calls karma yoga. Action without selfish attachment to the fruits. This does not mean becoming careless. It does not mean abandoning ambition. It does not mean pretending you do not care. It means understanding the difference between commitment to action and attachment to outcome. You control your effort. You do not completely control the result. You control your intention. You do not control every circumstance. You control what you choose now. You do not control what happened yesterday. The ego wants guarantees. Karma Yoga teaches responsibility without demanding ownership of the universe, and this is the beginning of freedom. Now we reach the question that hurts the most. What if something has already happened? What if the karmic consequences have already been created? Can meditation erase them? Can prayer erase them? Can spiritual awakening erase them? The Vedic tradition gives a nuanced answer. Some consequences may still have to unfold. The Bhagavad Gita itself does not present liberation as a magical method for preventing every physical event from occurring. A realized person still has a body. The body still experiences hunger, illness, aging, heat, cold, pleasure, and pain. A liberated person does not necessarily become physically invulnerable. What changes is the relationship to experience. Consider a simple example. Two people lose the same amount of money. One thinks, "My life is destroyed." The other thinks, "This is painful, but money is not myself." The external event is similar. The internal consequence is radically different. One produces additional fear, resentment, obsession, and identity. The other experiences the event without allowing it to define the deepest sense of self. This distinction is fundamental because karma operates within the field of action and experience, but the deepest teachings of Vedanta point towards something beyond the changing field. They ask you to investigate who is the one experiencing karma. Close your eyes. Notice your thoughts. A thought appears. I am worried. Then another thought. I am excited. Then another. I should have done that differently. Thoughts are constantly moving, but something is aware of them. Now, notice your emotions. Anger appears, then disappears. Fear arrives, then changes. Joy comes, then fades. The emotional state changes, but awareness knows the changing state. Now notice your body. Your body has changed dramatically since childhood. The cells have changed. The face has changed. The strength has changed. Your preferences have changed. Your beliefs have changed. Yet there remains an astonishing sense of continuity. I am. The Upanishadic traditions repeatedly turn attention toward this deeper self. The self, in the highest sense, is not merely the personality, not the body, not the collection of memories, not the changing emotional states, not the social identity. The deepest self is described as Atman, and in Advaita Vedanta, Atman is ultimately understood as not separate from Brahman, the ultimate reality. This is where the question of escaping karma takes a dramatic turn. If you identify entirely with the body-mind personality, karma appears to belong completely to you. I was born. I acted. I suffered. I accumulated karma. I will be reborn. But if the deepest self is not the changing body-mind, then liberation is not about making the ego's karmic account perfectly balanced. It is about discovering that your deepest identity was never the ego in the first place. Imagine you are dreaming. In the dream, you are being chased. You are terrified. You run through a city. You hide. You fight. You lose. You suffer. Everything feels completely real. Then suddenly, you wake up. What happened to the person who was being chased? Did they escape the city? Did they defeat their enemy? Did they repay their debt? No. The dream ended because you awakened to a different level of reality. This analogy appears in different forms throughout Indian philosophy, but it must be used carefully. The sages were not saying that your suffering is meaningless. They were pointing toward a deeper distinction. The experience of bondage and the ultimate identity of consciousness are not necessarily the same thing. The person inside the dream experiences consequences. The waking consciousness recognizes the dream as a dream. Similarly, spiritual realization does not necessarily mean that the physical world disappears. It means the mistaken identification with the limited ego begins to dissolve. This is why liberation is called moksha. Moksha is freedom. Freedom from the fundamental ignorance that keeps consciousness identifying itself as merely the limited individual. This question has produced centuries of philosophical discussion. A common Vedantic explanation is that knowledge destroys the accumulated karmic bondage associated with ignorance, while the karma already responsible for the present embodiment, prarabdha, is allowed to continue until the body reaches its natural end. A famous analogy compares it to an arrow already released. Before release, you can choose not to shoot. After release, the arrow is already moving. You cannot call it back merely because you have changed your mind. Likewise, realization does not necessarily mean that every previously initiated physical process immediately disappears. The body may continue, life may continue, circumstances may continue, but the realized person no longer identifies with them in the same way. This is one of the deepest distinctions in the entire subject. Freedom does not necessarily mean freedom from experience. It means freedom from mistaken identification with experience. You may still feel pain, but pain does not have to become I am broken. You may experience loss, but loss does not have to become I have lost myself. You may experience success, but success does not have to become I am superior. You may experience failure, but failure does not have to become I am worthless. The event happens, the mind responds, but awareness remains free. There is another side to this discussion that must not be ignored. The concept of karma can become spiritually dangerous when it is used to blame people for their suffering. Someone becomes ill and people say it is their karma. Someone is born into poverty and someone says they deserve it because of a past life. Someone suffers abuse and someone says they must have caused this in another existence. This can turn a spiritual teaching into cruelty. The Vedic traditions contain many sophisticated teachings on karma, but no simplistic human being possesses a complete cosmic ledger of another person's past. We do not know the total causes behind another person's existence, and even within karma theory, action in the present remains enormously important. Compassion matters, dharma matters, ethical responsibility matters, helping someone matters. If someone is suffering, the appropriate response is not to stand outside their pain and declare them guilty. The appropriate response is to act according to Dharma. This is especially important because the same doctrine that explains continuity of cause and effect can also teach responsibility. Your past may influence your present, but your present choices influence what comes next. Therefore, karma should never become an excuse for passivity. Imagine you are born with a particular temperament. Maybe you are naturally impatient. Does that mean you must remain impatient? No. You may have a tendency, but you can observe it. You can practice differently. You can create new impressions. You can strengthen a different pattern. Perhaps you grew up around anger. You learned to react aggressively, but one day you notice the pattern. Someone provokes you. You feel the anger rising, and for the first time, instead of immediately reacting, you pause. That pause is enormous, because in that pause the chain has been interrupted. The old pattern says stimulus to reaction. Awareness creates stimulus to awareness to choice, and choice creates a new trajectory. This is why spiritual practice matters. Meditation is not simply relaxation. Self-inquiry is not intellectual entertainment. Ethical discipline is not moral decoration. They are methods for weakening unconscious patterns. Every time you observe a desire without obeying it, you weaken its absolute authority. Every time you choose compassion instead of resentment, you strengthen a different tendency. Every time you act without selfish attachment, you reduce karmic entanglement. Every time you recognize yourself as the witness of the mind rather than merely its contents, you loosen identification. And eventually, the question changes. Instead of asking, how can I escape my karma? You begin asking, how can I stop creating bondage? That is a much more powerful question. According to the broader Vedic philosophical framework, desire is one of the engines of samsara, the cycle of repeated birth and death. Why? Because desire creates movement. I want, I need, I must have, I cannot live without this. And when? The object is obtained. The mind wants to preserve it. When it disappears, the mind suffers. Then another object is desired, and the cycle continues. The Bhagavad Gita describes a chain beginning with dwelling on objects, leading toward attachment, desire, anger, confusion, and eventually the loss of discernment. The precise teaching is more subtle than desire is evil. Desire itself is not always presented as something that must simply be crushed. The deeper issue is attachment and ignorance. A person can have goals without being enslaved by them. A person can work without being consumed by achievement. A person can love without trying to possess. A person can enjoy without believing. Enjoyment is the source of permanent fulfillment. This is the difference between using life and being used by craving. Perhaps you are thinking, but what if I have made serious mistakes? Maybe your past contains things you deeply regret. Maybe you hurt someone. Maybe you betrayed your own values. Maybe you wasted years. Maybe you became addicted to a destructive pattern. Maybe you lived according to anger, greed, lust, pride, or fear. Does karma mean you are permanently condemned to repeat your past? No. The entire possibility of spiritual transformation depends upon the answer being no. The Bhagavad Gita contains a powerful teaching about even a person of extremely harmful conduct turning toward knowledge and righteousness. The point is not that actions have no consequences. The point is that a person's present transformation matters. A mistake can become the source of deeper wisdom. Regret can become discernment. Pain can become compassion. Failure can become humility. The past cannot be rewritten, but the meaning of the past can change. A person who once lived unconsciously can begin living consciously. That is not escaping responsibility. It is accepting responsibility at a deeper level. There is an important distinction here. Feeling guilty is not the same as transformation. You can spend 10 years saying, "I am a bad person," and still remain exactly the same. Why? Because guilt can become another form of ego identification. The ego says, "I am terrible," and secretly it remains obsessed with itself. Transformation asks something else. What produced this action? What desire was operating? What belief allowed me to justify it? What pattern keeps repeating? What can I change now? This is closer to the Vedic approach to self-knowledge. You examine the mechanism, you understand the mind, you recognize the root, and then you act differently. That is how karma is transformed, not through endless self-hatred, through awareness, discipline, knowledge, and dharmic action. One of the most beautiful metaphors in the Bhagavad Gita compares knowledge to fire. Fire consumes what is placed into it. Knowledge, in this metaphor, burns the binding power of karma. But what does that mean? It does not mean memorizing Sanskrit verses. It does not mean collecting spiritual facts. It does not mean becoming able to argue about philosophy. Knowledge here means direct recognition. You begin to see, I am not merely this passing thought. I am not every emotion that arises. I am not the role I am currently playing. I am not the temporary collection of circumstances that I call myself. The more deeply this insight becomes established, the less power external events have to define your identity. And that is freedom. There is a useful way to understand karma through the image of two arrows. The first arrow is the event. Something happens, you lose money, someone rejects you, a relationship ends, your body becomes ill, someone insults you. The first arrow may be painful, but then the mind fires a second arrow. Why me? This should not have happened. My life is ruined. They destroyed me. I can never recover. Now, suffering has doubled. The first arrow was the event. The second arrow was identification and resistance. The Vedic traditions repeatedly encourage a transformation of the relationship between consciousness and experience. This does not mean becoming emotionless. It means seeing clearly. Pain can be experienced without turning it into an identity. And once you learn this, karma becomes less frightening, because you realize not every experience needs to become another chain. Here we need to make another distinction. Destiny, as people commonly imagine it, means a fixed script. Everything has already been decided. Nothing you do can change it. But karma is not necessarily equivalent to fatalism. If karma meant absolute determinism, spiritual practice would be pointless. Why meditate? Why act ethically? Why seek knowledge? Why cultivate compassion? Why pursue liberation? The very existence of a path implies that conscious action matters. Your past creates tendencies and circumstances, but your present response is itself a cause. Imagine a river. You may not control the fact that the river is flowing, but you can build a boat. You can change direction. You can learn to navigate. You can sometimes alter the channel. And eventually, you may realize that you are not the river at all. This is a powerful metaphor for the human condition. Your past influences the conditions you inherit. Your present consciousness determines how you respond. Your response shapes future tendencies, and spiritual knowledge reveals the deeper self beyond the entire movement. So, can you escape the karma of your past? The first answer is, you cannot simply demand that every consequence disappear because you have become spiritual. If you have created consequences, you may have to experience some of them, but you are not required to create additional bondage around them. You can respond differently. You can stop repeating patterns. You can act without attachment. You can cultivate dharma. You can purify the mind. You can pursue knowledge. And at the highest level, you can discover the self that is not fundamentally defined by the karmic story of the personality. This is why liberation is not merely good karma. Good karma can produce better experiences. But moksha is something more radical. Good karma is still karma. If you plant a beautiful garden, you still remain within the world of planting and harvesting. Liberation is the discovery of freedom from the entire compulsive cycle. And that distinction will become even more important in the second part, because there is a surprising problem. What if even good karma can keep you trapped? What if becoming a better person is not yet the final answer? What if the ultimate escape from karma requires something beyond accumulating good deeds? And what exactly happens to karma when true knowledge arises? That is where the deepest Vedic answer begins. Imagine two prisoners. The first prisoner is violent, the second prisoner is kind. The first spends his days fighting. The second spends his days helping other prisoners. One is hated, the other is loved, but both are still inside the prison. This is the problem with understanding karma only as good actions versus bad actions. Good karma is certainly preferable to harmful karma. Dharma is preferable to adharma. Compassion is preferable to cruelty. Truth is preferable to deception. But the Vedic traditions ultimately ask a more radical question. What if freedom means leaving the prison altogether? This is the difference between improving one's circumstances and attaining moksha. Good karma can produce beneficial results, but liberation is not simply receiving better results. It is freedom from the binding mechanism that makes you dependent upon results at all. And now we can finally answer the question, can you escape the karma of your past? Yes, but not in the simplistic way you may imagine. You do not escape karma by running from your life. You do not escape karma by trying to erase history. You do not escape karma by accumulating enough good deeds to create a perfect spiritual balance sheet. You escape karmic bondage by transforming action, purifying intention, dissolving attachment, cultivating knowledge, and ultimately recognizing the true nature of the self. The Bhagavad Gita presents several complementary approaches to liberation. They are often described through terms such as karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga. These should not necessarily be imagined as competing religions. They are different orientations of spiritual transformation. Karma yoga transforms the way you act. Jnana yoga transforms the way you understand. Bhakti transforms the way you relate to the divine. All three can loosen the grip of ego, and this is crucial, because karma is deeply connected to egoic identification. I am the doer. I am the enjoyer. I deserve this. I need this result. I must control what happens. The spiritual path gradually weakens this structure. The first transformation is inaction. You still work. You still fulfill responsibilities. You still make decisions. You still earn money. You still raise children. You still build businesses. You still create art. You still struggle. But something changes internally. You stop saying, I need this result to prove who I am. Instead, I will perform my duty as sincerely as I can, and I will accept that the result is not entirely mine to command. This is nishkama karma in the familiar Gita interpretation, action without selfish attachment to the fruit. Notice what this does. If you become obsessed with the result, your emotional state becomes dependent on the future. You are always somewhere else. If I get this, then I will be happy. If they love me, then I will be complete. If I become successful, then I will finally be enough. But karma yoga brings you back to the action itself. The quality of the action becomes the focus. Your responsibility becomes the focus. Your intention becomes the focus. The future is still important, but it no longer owns your identity, and when attachment decreases, karmic bondage decreases. The Bhagavad Gita repeatedly develops the idea of offering action to the divine. This is not merely ritual, it is a transformation of ownership. Imagine cooking a meal. Normally the ego thinks, I cooked this. I deserve praise. I worked hard. Everyone should appreciate me. Now imagine the same action performed as an offering. You still cook carefully. You still care about quality. But internally you say, this action is offered. The action remains. The egoic claim over the action weakens. This principle can transform ordinary life. Work becomes offering, service becomes offering, study becomes offering, creativity becomes offering, parenthood becomes offering, even difficulty can become offering. And gradually the mind stops constantly asking, what am I getting? Instead it asks, what is the right thing to do? That is the beginning of Dharma. Dharma is one of those Sanskrit words that cannot be perfectly translated with a single English word. It can involve duty, order, righteousness, responsibility, the sustaining principle of life, and appropriate conduct. In the Gita, Dharma is deeply connected to one's responsibilities and the larger order of existence. The crucial point is that Dharma shifts the center of attention away from pure self-interest. Instead of asking, what benefits me? You ask, what is right here? What is required of me? What action reduces harm? What action supports truth? What action is aligned with my responsibilities? This matters because selfish action reinforces the ego. Dharma-oriented action can weaken it, and when action becomes less about self-centered acquisition, it creates less bondage. Human beings suffer because they want control over things they cannot control. You can influence another person. You cannot completely control them. You can care for your body. You cannot prevent aging forever. You can work intelligently. You cannot guarantee success. You can love someone. You cannot guarantee that they will stay. You can make plans. You cannot command reality to obey them. Karma Yoga asks you to recognize this distinction. Do what is yours to do. Release what is not yours to control. This is not passivity. It is precision. You stop wasting energy fighting reality itself. You begin using your energy to respond intelligently. And this creates inner freedom. Now suppose you have accumulated destructive tendencies. Perhaps you are addicted to anger. Perhaps you constantly compare yourself with others. Perhaps you lie. Perhaps you seek validation. Perhaps you are consumed by jealousy. You cannot simply say, "I am spiritual now." The pattern does not disappear because you adopted spiritual language. You must practice. The mind must be trained. This is why the Gita repeatedly emphasizes discipline. The senses pull outward. The mind follows. Desire arises. Attachment develops. The individual becomes caught. The solution is not hatred of the senses. It is mastery. You learn to observe. You learn to discriminate. You learn to choose. This process is sometimes described through the language of tapas, discipline, or austerity. But authentic tapas is not merely torturing the body. It is the disciplined transformation of the person. You become capable of doing what is right, even when the mind wants something else. That is freedom. Remember the idea of samskara? Every action can leave an impression. That means the reverse is also possible. New actions can create new impressions. Suppose you have spent years reacting with anger. Now you begin practicing patience. At first, it feels unnatural. Then you manage one difficult situation without exploding, then another. Slowly, patience becomes easier. A new pathway has been strengthened. The old tendency may not disappear immediately, but it loses power. This is why spiritual transformation often feels frustrating. You expect one insight to erase 20 years of conditioning. It usually does not work that way. Insight opens the door. Practice walks through it. You may understand that anger is destructive, but understanding alone does not guarantee that you will stop becoming angry. You must repeatedly live the understanding. This is why the ancient traditions place such emphasis on disciplined practice. Meditation can be understood as a laboratory for seeing karma in real time. Sit quietly, close your eyes, do nothing, then watch. A thought appears. I should check my phone. Another thought. Why am I wasting time? Another. I need to solve that problem. Another. I wonder what they think of me. Notice what happens. A thought appears. Then identification occurs. Then emotion. Then impulse. Then action. Meditation gives you a space between these stages. You begin to see the machinery. This is extraordinarily important because unconscious karma operates automatically. You do not consciously decide every reaction, but meditation reveals the reaction before it becomes behavior. You see the impulse, and sometimes you do not follow it. That is freedom in miniature. The more you observe thoughts without immediately identifying with them, the more you recognize the witness. You begin to notice anger is present rather than I am anger. Fear is present rather than I am fear. Desire is present rather than I must obey this desire. This small linguistic shift points toward a profound philosophical transformation. You are separating awareness from its temporary contents. This does not mean emotions should be suppressed. Suppression is not liberation. You allow the emotion to be known, but you do not automatically become it. And eventually the question arises, who is aware of all these changing states? That question leads toward jnana. Jnana means knowledge, but spiritual knowledge is not merely information. You can read 100 books about fire and still not have warmth. You can memorize every description of the self and still remain identified with the ego. Jnana is transformative recognition. The Upanishadic tradition asks you to investigate the nature of the self. Who am I? Am I this body? The body changes. Am I the mind? Thoughts change. Am I emotions? They change. Am I memory? Memory is incomplete and constantly reconstructed. Am I my social role? That role changes. Then what remains? The inquiry continues, and eventually the seeker turns toward pure awareness, the witnessing consciousness, the self. A famous Indian philosophical metaphor describes someone walking at night and seeing what appears to be a snake. Fear arises. The person runs, they sweat, their heart races. But then a lamp is brought. There is no snake. There was a rope. Notice something profound. The fear was real as an experience, but the object of the fear was misunderstood. The solution was not to fight the snake, it was to see clearly. This is how ignorance is treated in Advaita Vedanta. The individual mistakes the limited ego and changing phenomena for the ultimate self. Because of that misunderstanding, attachment and fear arise. Then action follows. Action creates consequences. Consequences create further experience. The cycle continues. Knowledge removes the fundamental misunderstanding, and when the misunderstanding is removed, the structure of bondage changes. You do not have to destroy the universe. You have to see it correctly. One of the most important ideas in the Gita is the relationship between action and the sense of doership. The ego says, I am the one doing everything. But think about your next breath. Did you consciously construct every molecule involved? Did you command your heart to beat? Did you design every neural signal? Did you invent gravity? Did you create the sunlight? Human beings act, certainly, but every action occurs within an enormous network of causes and conditions. The body, environment, society, biology, upbringing, education, memory, circumstance, and countless other factors participate. This does not eliminate responsibility. It transforms the meaning of responsibility. You are responsible for your choices, but you are not an isolated cosmic controller. The more deeply you understand this, the less inflated the ego becomes, and that humility weakens karmic attachment. This is an important objection. If everything is happening through nature, why should anyone do anything? The Gita does not use non-doership as an excuse for irresponsibility. Arjuna still has to act. The body-mind participates in the world. Dharma still matters. The insight is not, nothing matters. It is, do what must be done without building your entire identity around the idea of being the independent controller of reality. That is very different. You act, but you surrender ownership of the ultimate outcome. You perform your role, but you recognize that the universe is larger than your individual ego. There is another way karma can be transformed. Devotion, bhakti. Instead of constantly trying to control reality, you turn toward the divine. You say, I do not understand everything. I cannot control everything. I offer my actions. I accept what comes. I seek alignment with something greater than my ego. For some people, this is easier than intellectual self-inquiry. The heart can surrender where the mind struggles. Bhakti transforms the relationship with action. You are no longer acting only for yourself. You act as service. You work as offering. You pray not merely give me what I want, but give me the clarity to accept what is right. This can radically change the karmic structure of life. Surrender does not mean giving up. A person can say, everything is God's will, and then use that statement as an excuse to do nothing. That is not spiritual surrender. True surrender can require enormous action. Arjuna does not escape the battlefield by saying, I surrender. Krishna's teaching leads him toward clarity and action. Surrender means releasing the ego's demand that reality conform perfectly to its desires. You still act. You still protect. You still work. You still correct mistakes. You still pursue justice. But you stop believing that your personal preference is the center of the universe. Now, we can return to the original question. Suppose you begin practicing karma yoga. You meditate. You cultivate dharma. You develop devotion. You pursue self-knowledge. What happens to your accumulated karma? Different schools of Indian philosophy explain this differently, and it is important not to pretend there is only one universal Vedic formulation. But in Advaita Vedanta, a common teaching is that knowledge destroys the karmic bondage rooted in ignorance. The accumulated store, sanchita karma, is often described as being burned by knowledge. Karma already fructifying as the present embodiment, prarabdha, is traditionally said to continue until its momentum is exhausted. And actions performed after realization do not bind the realized person in the same way, because the fundamental ignorance and egoic attachment have been removed. This is where the arrow analogy becomes useful again. An arrow already released continues moving. The archer may have realized something after releasing it, but the arrow's momentum remains. Likewise, the enlightened person may continue to experience the life already underway. The body continues, the world continues, but the identification has changed. Imagine a wave in the ocean. The wave rises, it becomes large, it becomes small, it crashes. Another wave appears. Suppose the wave becomes frightened. I am going to disappear. From the perspective of the wave, death is terrifying, but from the perspective of water, nothing fundamental has been lost. The wave was never separate from the ocean. This is one way to understand the relationship between Atman and Brahman in Advaita. The individual ego experiences itself as separate. I am this person. I have my story. I have my karma. I must protect myself. But the deeper teaching points toward the recognition that consciousness is not merely an isolated object inside the universe. The wave recognizes, I am water. That recognition does not prevent the wave from rising and falling. It changes the meaning of rising and falling. Likewise, spiritual realization does not necessarily stop life. It changes identification with life. This is important. You meditate for years. You understand karma. You practice detachment. And then someone insults you. You still feel hurt. Does that mean spirituality failed? Not necessarily. The body-mind can retain conditioning. Old samskaras can continue to arise. The difference is that you may no longer feed them. Anger arises. You notice it. You do not build an entire story around it. Fear arises. You recognize it. You do not make it your identity. Pain arises. You care for yourself. You do not interpret pain as proof that existence has betrayed you. Spiritual maturity is not the absence of every sensation. It is a different relationship to sensation. Here is the loop most people never notice. You experience something, then you interpret it. The interpretation creates emotion. The emotion creates desire or resistance. The desire creates action. The action creates consequence. The consequence becomes another experience, and the cycle continues. For example, someone rejects you. You interpret rejection as, "I am not worthy." That creates pain. Pain creates a desire. "I must prove myself." You begin chasing validation. Someone finally validates you. You feel temporary pleasure. Then the fear of losing validation appears. So you continue performing. Now, the original rejection has become a karmic pattern. The event itself was only one moment. The interpretation created the chain. This is why self-knowledge is so powerful. When you see the mechanism, you can stop feeding it. This question requires caution. The Vedic and broader Hindu traditions contain teachings about rebirth, karma across lives, and the continuity of subtle impressions. But modern people often turn this into fortune-telling. I was a king in my past life. I was betrayed by the same person. This disease is definitely because of something I did in another life. These claims cannot simply be treated as established facts. The philosophical teaching is more important than the fantasy. If rebirth exists, then the lesson is not become obsessed with discovering your previous identity. The lesson is understand the pattern of consciousness now. Because even if you knew who you were in another life, the fundamental question would remain, who are you now? What are you doing now? What desires are controlling you now? What actions are you creating now? What are you identified with now? Spirituality becomes distorted when curiosity about past lives replaces transformation in the present. Think about your childhood. You cannot remember every day, yet your childhood influenced you. You do not need to remember every event for its effects to exist. Likewise, if one accepts the traditional doctrine of rebirth, the absence of conscious memory would not necessarily invalidate the idea of continuity. The important point is not memory, it is tendency. The tradition is concerned with the continuity of karmic impressions and consciousness through the cycle of samsara. And this gives us a practical lesson. You do not need to know every cause in your past to change your present. You only need to become conscious of what is happening now. Sometimes life is deeply unfair. Two people can work equally hard and receive different outcomes. One person can be born into extraordinary privilege. Another can be born into suffering. One person can make terrible decisions and appear to succeed. Another can live honestly and struggle. Karma theory attempts to provide a larger causal framework, especially through rebirth. But we must be careful. We cannot use karma to claim certainty about the hidden reasons for every individual event. Human knowledge is limited, and ethical action does not require knowing why someone suffers. If a person is drowning, you do not ask, "What karma caused this?" You rescue them. That itself is dharma. Compassion is not opposed to karma. Compassion is one of the ways you participate in the world wisely. There is something even deeper. The greatest karmic transformation may not be changing what happens to you. It may be changing what you are, not the personality, not the social identity, but the level of identification from which you live. A person who thinks, "I am the victim of my past," lives differently from someone who thinks, "My past influenced me, but I am responsible for how I respond now." And both are different from someone who recognizes, "I am the witnessing consciousness in which this entire story appears." These are three levels of understanding. At the first level, karma is a prison. At the second, karma becomes a teacher. At the third, karma is recognized as part of the changing field of experience, while the deepest self is understood as beyond it. Imagine someone repeatedly enters unhealthy relationships. They ask, "Why does this always happen to me?" Perhaps the most useful question is, what am I repeatedly choosing? Maybe they fear abandonment, maybe they confuse intensity with love, maybe they seek people who confirm an old belief, maybe they never learned boundaries. The pattern may be called karma. But now, karma has become useful. It points toward a lesson. The pattern is not merely punishment, it is information. And once the information is understood, conscious action can change. This is a profound way of relating to karma. Do not ask only what you deserve. Ask what you are being shown. When something painful happens, there are usually 3 automatic responses: fight it, run from it, or become consumed by it. The spiritual path introduces a 4th response: witness it, understand it, and respond consciously. Someone insults you. You notice anger. You examine it. You ask, what exactly was threatened? Perhaps pride, perhaps identity, perhaps insecurity. Now the insult becomes an opportunity for self-knowledge. That does not mean allowing abuse. You can establish boundaries. You can leave. You can defend yourself. But your action no longer needs to come from unconscious rage. This is karma yoga in real life. One of the most dangerous beliefs about karma is, this is just who I am. I have always been like this. My family is like this. My life is like this. I cannot change. The Vedic worldview is not a doctrine of helplessness. Transformation is possible because consciousness can recognize its own patterns. You can create new tendencies. You can cultivate sattva. In the classical Samkhya and Yoga traditions, the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, describe fundamental qualities or tendencies of Prakriti. Tamas is associated with inertia, heaviness, obscuration, rajas with activity, passion, restlessness, sattva with clarity, harmony, luminosity. These tendencies influence the mind. If your life is dominated by tamas, you may need discipline and movement. If dominated by rajas, you may need stillness. As sattva increases, clarity increases. But even sattva is not the final liberation. This is another important point. You may move from chaos to clarity, from destructive action to virtuous action, from restlessness to peace. But moksha goes beyond even the refinement of personality. It is freedom from identification with Prakriti itself. Think of good karma as a bridge. You need the bridge, but you do not worship the bridge as the destination. Ethical action purifies the mind. Service weakens selfishness. Meditation increases clarity. Devotion softens ego. Discipline strengthens attention. All of these can prepare consciousness for deeper knowledge. But eventually, the seeker must ask, who is the one performing all these practices? That question takes you from spiritual self-improvement towards spiritual realization. At first, spirituality makes you want to become a better person. That is good. But eventually, you may discover a subtle trap. The ego begins saying, I am more spiritual than other people. I meditate more. I understand karma. I am awakened. Now spirituality has become another identity, another attachment, another karmic structure. This is why humility is essential. The moment you think you have conquered the ego may have simply changed its clothing. True wisdom is less interested in proving superiority. It becomes simpler, more compassionate, less defensive, less obsessed with being seen as special. The person becomes lighter. Now we can define the word escape. It does not mean never experiencing pain, never experiencing loss, never facing consequences, never making mistakes, never feeling fear, never aging, never dying. It means no longer being fundamentally bound by the mistaken identification that turns experience into bondage. You may still have a past, but the past does not own you. You may still have tendencies, but tendencies do not have to command you. You may still have responsibilities, but responsibility does not have to become egoic bondage. You may still experience consequences, but consequences do not have to define your deepest identity. That is freedom. The Bhagavad Gita's teaching ultimately moves towards surrender, discernment, devotion, and liberation. Krishna does not simply tell Arjuna, everything is karma. Accept it. He gives him knowledge. He teaches action. He teaches meditation. He teaches devotion. He teaches discernment. He teaches the nature of the self. And then, after giving the teaching, he tells Arjuna to reflect and choose. This is important. Spiritual wisdom is not supposed to destroy your agency. It is supposed to refine it. The final decision remains yours, and that means your present moment is extraordinarily powerful, because this moment is where the past becomes the future. Think about everything that has happened before today. You cannot change it. You cannot travel backward. You cannot speak to your younger self. You cannot undo every mistake. You cannot force people to make different decisions. But you can do something incredibly important. You can decide what the next action will be. That action may appear tiny. You choose not to send the angry message. You apologize. You tell the truth. You meditate instead of reacting. You walk away from a destructive habit. You help someone without expecting recognition. You perform your work sincerely. You forgive without pretending the harm never happened. You establish a boundary. You stop chasing validation. You choose discipline. You sit quietly and observe your mind. These moments appear ordinary, but they are the places where karma changes direction. Perhaps you came to this question because you are tired of repeating the same mistakes, tired of wondering why certain experiences keep returning, tired of thinking that some invisible force has already written your life. But the Vedic answer is more hopeful than fatalistic. You are not merely the victim of a cosmic punishment system. Your actions matter. Your intentions matter. Your awareness matters. Your present choices matter. And deeper than all of them is the self. The self is not something you manufacture. It is something you recognize. You do not become Atman by performing enough good deeds. You discover that the deepest self was never merely the egoic personality you were trying to perfect. This is why the path has two dimensions. First, purify the way you live. Then investigate who is living. Act with Dharma. Practice detachment. Cultivate compassion. Meditate. Offer your actions. Seek knowledge. And gradually turn attention inward. Eventually the question changes completely. At the beginning you ask, how can I escape my karma? Then, how can I create better karma? Then, how can I stop creating karmic bondage? And finally, who am I before karma? That final question is the doorway, because karma belongs to the realm of action. The body acts, the mind thinks, the senses perceive, the personality chooses, consequences unfold. But the deepest spiritual inquiry asks whether the witnessing consciousness itself is an actor in the same sense. Advaita Vedanta says the ultimate self is not the changing doer. It is pure awareness. And if that recognition becomes direct and stable, liberation becomes possible. Not because the universe has been manipulated, not because the past has been erased, but because the one who believed, "I am this limited karmic individual," has awakened to a deeper truth. Now, we can give the answer clearly. You cannot always escape every consequence of past action. Some things may have to unfold, some lessons may have to be experienced, some consequences may already be in motion. But this does not mean you are helpless. You can stop creating new bondage. Through karma yoga, you learn to act without selfish attachment. Through dharma, you align action with responsibility and righteousness. Through meditation, you become aware of unconscious patterns. Through discipline, you transform tendencies. Through bhakti, you surrender the demand to control everything. Through jnana, you investigate the nature of the self. And through realization, according to the highest Vedantic teaching, you discover that your deepest identity is not the limited ego that has been collecting karmic stories across time. That is the escape. Not running away from life, not denying the past, not pretending consequences do not exist, but awakening from the mistaken identification that makes karma a prison. Imagine standing beside a river. For years, you believed the river was dragging you somewhere. You fought the current, you became exhausted, you screamed at the water, you blamed the river. Then someone taught you how to swim, you learned how the current works, you stopped fighting blindly. You learned to navigate, eventually you built a boat. Now you can move with awareness. But then something even stranger happens. You look down into the water, you see the reflection of the sky, you see the movement, you see the waves, and you realize the current was never your identity. You are always the awareness observing it. The past is the current, the present is the place where you steer. The future is shaped by what you do now. But the deepest self is not merely the river, it is that which knows the river. And perhaps that is the real secret the sages were pointing toward. You do not defeat karma by fighting the past. You defeat karmic bondage by becoming conscious. You stop reacting blindly. You stop feeding every desire. You stop turning every wound into an identity. You stop demanding that every action produce the result you want. You stop believing that your circumstances completely define you. And eventually, you stop confusing the changing story with the one who is aware of the story. That is why the Vedic answer is neither fatalistic nor simplistic. It does not tell you everything is predetermined. And it does not tell you you can magically erase everything. It tells you something far more demanding. Your past has influence, but your present has power. Your actions matter. Your intentions matter. Your attention matters. Your understanding matters. And beyond all of them lies the possibility of awakening. So if you are carrying regret today, do not ask only, "What did I do to deserve this?" Ask, "What can I learn from this?" If you are repeating a pattern, do not ask only, "Why does this keep happening to me?" Ask, "What am I repeatedly creating?" If you are suffering, do not immediately conclude, "This is my punishment." Ask, "How can I meet this experience without creating more bondage?" And if you have begun to seek liberation, do not stop at, "How can I create good karma?" Go deeper. Ask, "Who is the one to whom karma appears?" That question can take you beyond the endless accounting of past and future. Because perhaps the ultimate purpose of karma was never to make you spend eternity paying for your actions. Perhaps karma was part of the education of consciousness. Action teaches. Consequence teaches, attachment teaches, loss teaches, desire teaches, failure teaches, love teaches. Even suffering can become a doorway to inquiry. Until one day, the seeker stops asking, "What can the world give me?" and begins asking, "What is real?" Then the journey changes. You are no longer merely trying to improve the dream, you are investigating the dreamer. You are no longer trying to build the perfect identity. You are investigating the awareness in which every identity appears. You are no longer trying to escape your story. You are discovering that the deepest self was never limited to the story. And this is the most radical possibility contained within the Vedic vision. Karma may shape the journey of the individual, but liberation comes through knowing the self beyond the individual story. So, yes, you can escape the bondage of karma, but perhaps not by escaping your life, not by escaping responsibility, not by escaping consequences, and certainly not by escaping yourself. You escape by seeing yourself clearly, act without attachment, live according to Dharma, purify the mind, serve without demanding reward, meditate, question your assumptions, release what you cannot control, learn from what happens, stop repeating what causes suffering, and turn inward. Because the final freedom is not, "I have finally created perfect karma." The final freedom is, "I know who I am beyond the karma I have created." And when that realization becomes more than an idea, when it becomes lived knowledge, the past may still have a story, but it no longer has the power to define the self. The wheel may continue turning for a time, the body may continue walking, the consequences of life may continue unfolding, but the one who once believed, "I am trapped inside this wheel," has discovered something astonishing. The wheel belongs to the realm of change. The self is the witness of change, and the witness was never imprisoned in the first place. That is the Vedic answer. You may not be able to erase your past, but you can stop letting your past create your future unconsciously. And beyond even that, you can awaken to the self that was never bound by the past at all. That is not merely escaping karma. That is liberation. That is moksha. There is one final misunderstanding about karma that we need to confront. It is the belief that liberation means getting rid of everything difficult, no pain, no loss, no uncertainty, no consequences, no struggle. But the sages were pointing towards something much deeper. Imagine two people walking through the same storm. One spends the entire journey screaming at the sky, "Why is this happening to me?" The other feels the rain, gets wet, becomes tired, and still keeps walking. The storm is the same, but their relationship to the storm is completely different. This is the difference between suffering and bondage. Pain may be part of life. Bondage is the belief that pain defines who you are, and karma becomes binding when every experience is converted into identity. Someone rejects you. You don't simply experience rejection. You conclude, "I am unworthy." You lose money. You don't simply experience financial loss. You conclude, "My life is a failure." You make a mistake. You don't simply recognize the mistake. You conclude, "I am a bad person." The event becomes an identity, and identity produces more action, more fear, more attachment, more reaction, more karma. The spiritual path interrupts this process. You begin saying, "This is happening," instead of, "This is who I am." That small difference can transform an entire life. There is another powerful way to break karmic patterns: forgiveness. Not because harmful actions do not matter, not because you should allow people to hurt you repeatedly, but because resentment can become its own karmic chain. Think about someone who hurt you years ago. The event lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but you replay it for 10 years. The person may have forgotten. You have not. Every time you remember the event, anger returns. Your body reacts. Your mind reconstructs the story. You imagine what you should have said. You imagine revenge. You imagine another outcome. The person may no longer be present in your life, yet they continue living inside your mind. This is another form of bondage. Forgiveness does not mean declaring that the action was acceptable. It means refusing to allow the action to control your consciousness forever. You release the person from the role they continue to play in your inner world. And sometimes the person you most need to forgive is yourself. Many people believe that punishing themselves proves they regret what they did, but endless self-hatred does not necessarily create wisdom. Sometimes it simply creates another identity. I am the person who ruined everything. And then the mind behaves according to that identity. The Vedic path asks for something more intelligent. Recognize the mistake, accept responsibility, repair what can be repaired, learn what must be learned, change the behavior, then continue walking. The past deserves understanding, but it does not deserve unlimited ownership of your future. This is why awareness is more powerful than guilt. Guilt says, I am bad. Awareness says, this action created suffering. I understand why it happened. I will not repeat it. The second response creates transformation. Have you ever noticed that certain situations seem to repeat? The same kind of relationship, the same kind of conflict, the same kind of betrayal, the same financial mistake, the same emotional reaction. You may call this karma. And perhaps the label is useful, but the practical question is, what are you refusing to see? Maybe the repeated relationship is showing you that you have no boundaries. Maybe the repeated conflict is showing you that you cannot tolerate criticism. Maybe the repeated financial loss is revealing impulsiveness. Maybe the repeated loneliness is revealing your fear of vulnerability. The pattern continues until awareness changes the response. This is why karma can be viewed as a teacher, not necessarily a punishment, a teacher. The same lesson may appear again and again because the student keeps answering it in the same way. But once the response changes, the pattern can lose its power. Imagine someone says something that normally triggers you. In the past, you would immediately react. But this time, you notice the impulse. You breathe. You observe the anger. You realize that responding aggressively will create another cycle. So you choose silence, or you respond calmly. That moment may look insignificant, but spiritually, it is enormous, because something that previously happened automatically has now entered the field of awareness. The chain has been interrupted. This is how freedom begins. Not with some spectacular mystical experience. Sometimes liberation begins with something as ordinary as, I will not repeat this. Your past can explain you, but it does not have to imprison you. Your childhood may explain your fears, your previous relationships may explain your expectations, your failures may explain your insecurity, your successes may explain your pride, your conditioning may explain your reactions, but explanation is not destiny. You can understand the pattern without surrendering to it. This is where the Vedic idea of self-mastery becomes incredibly practical. The mind is not your enemy, but an untrained mind can become your prison. Train it gently, observe it, question it, discipline it, purify it, and eventually recognize that even the trained mind is still something you are aware of. You are deeper than the mind. The journey can now be summarized in 4 movements. First, unconscious action. You act according to desire, fear, habit, and conditioning. Then, conscious action. You begin noticing your patterns and choosing differently. Then, selfless action. You act according to Dharma without being obsessed with personal reward. Finally, self-knowledge. You discover the deeper self beyond the changing personality. This is the movement from karma toward moksha, and perhaps the most beautiful part is that you do not need to wait for some distant future to begin. It starts with the next decision, the next thought you refuse to feed, the next desire you observe, the next act of honesty, the next apology, the next moment of patience, the next time you choose Dharma over ego, the next time you sit quietly and ask, "Who am I?" Your past does not have to be an anchor. It can become fuel. The person who has suffered can develop compassion. The person who has failed can develop humility. The person who has been betrayed can develop discernment. The person who has lived through chaos can develop discipline. The person who has lost everything can discover what cannot be lost, and this may be one of the deepest transformations karma can produce. You stop asking, "Why was this done to me?" and begin asking, "What can this awaken in me?" That is the difference between merely surviving your karma and using your life as a path toward liberation. So, can you escape the karma of your past? Not by pretending the past never happened, not by waiting for a miracle, not by blaming previous lives, not by collecting spiritual knowledge without changing your behavior, and not by trying to control every consequence. The Vedic answer is much more profound. Understand your karma. Take responsibility for your actions. Stop repeating unconscious patterns. Act according to Dharma. Release attachment to results. Offer your actions. Purify the mind. Seek knowledge. And finally, discover the self beyond the karmic story. Because perhaps the greatest freedom is not, "I have finally escaped everything that happened to me." It is, "What happened to me no longer determines who I believe I am." Your past may remain part of your story, but it does not have to remain the author. The author of your next chapter is the consciousness you bring to this moment. And if the ancient sages were right, there is something even greater waiting beyond that. A state in which you no longer live merely as the character inside the story. You awaken to the awareness in which the entire story appears. The karma of the personality may continue its movement. The body may continue its journey. The world may continue changing, but the deepest self remains untouched. And when that truth is realized, not merely believed, but directly known, the question, "How do I escape my karma?" begins to dissolve. Because you finally understand. Freedom was never about running away from the wheel. Freedom was about realizing that your deepest self was never the prisoner of the wheel. And that is the door the Vedic sages called moksha, the door beyond fear, beyond compulsive desire, beyond attachment, beyond the endless demand for life to become exactly what the ego wants. A freedom that does not depend on circumstances, a freedom that cannot be taken away by success or failure, a freedom that begins not somewhere in another world, but here, in this breath, in this choice, in this moment of awareness, and perhaps, right now, the cycle can change, not because your past disappeared, but because you are no longer meeting the present unconsciously.